Darius Brooks was 38 years old when his wife threw a party to celebrate leaving him. 60 guests. Champagne. A rented rooftop venue in Buckhead. Her declaration to everyone they knew that she was ascending, and he was the thing being left behind. For 2 years, Adrian had been redirecting $47,000 from their joint account, building an escape with another man, and telling anyone who would listen that Darius had no ceiling. And standing in that rooftop crowd, raising their glasses, were the neighbors, the church members, the colleagues who had all accepted her version of him. The quiet, unremarkable man with the modest salary and no real future. What none of them knew was that the venue they were standing in belonged to Darius, had belonged to him for 3 years, and at 9:52 that evening, the music stopped. Then came the sound, low at first, then overwhelming, a helicopter descending toward the adjacent landing pad. On its side panel, 3 words, Brooks Capital Holdings. The door opened, and the man his wife called Furniture stepped out. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The dinner table seated 8. Tonight, there were 2. Darius set his fork down on the rim of his plate and reached for his water glass without looking up. Across from him, Adrian cut her food into pieces she wasn't eating. She was dressed for somewhere else, a deep green wrap dress, the gold earrings she saved for occasions, a light perfume that didn't belong in the house on a Tuesday night. He had noticed all of it the moment she came downstairs. He noticed everything, always had. He said nothing. That was the shape of them now. 2 people sharing a table the way strangers share a waiting room, politely, quietly, with a clear understanding that the arrangement was temporary, and neither one was going to say it first. The kitchen smelled like the rosemary chicken he'd made from scratch, because cooking was one of the few things in this house that still felt like his. The overhead light was a little too bright. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at nothing. Darius ate. Adrian moved food around her plate. The dog kept barking. He had grown up in a small house in southwest Atlanta, where silence meant something bad was coming. His mother had worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility, and his father had left early enough that Darius only remembered him as a shape in a doorway. There, and then not. Silence in that house was the sound of waiting for the next hard thing. He had spent 38 years learning to read rooms, reading people, filing information away behind a face that gave nothing back. He was very good at it. His phone buzzed on the counter beside the refrigerator. He didn't get up. Dinner was dinner. Whatever it was could wait. Adrian glanced at it briefly, then returned to her plate. He watched her do it. She didn't know he was watching. She never did. He had taken the regional facilities director position 4 years ago, after a decade of working his way through commercial property management, leasing coordinator, operations supervisor, district manager. It wasn't glamorous. He knew that. The title didn't make people lean forward at dinner parties, didn't generate the specific kind of interest Adrian had once expected his career to generate. By year 3 of the marriage, she had stopped mentioning his job to her friends entirely. By year 5, she had begun that subtle rearrangement that ambitious people do when they've decided a situation is beneath them. The slight sighing, the barely visible flinch when he described his week, the way her face organized itself into patience rather than interest. He had noticed that too. He noticed everything and said almost none of it, because Darius Brooks had learned a long time ago that the loudest person in the room was rarely the most dangerous one. After dinner, he cleared the table. Adrian went upstairs to finish getting ready for wherever she was going. She hadn't said, and he hadn't asked. He heard the bathroom door close, the faint sound of something spritzed. He picked up his phone from the counter. There was one new message. It was from Adrian's number. He read it once. Just once. Can't stop thinking about last night. Tell me we're still on for Saturday. I need this, Porter. The kitchen was very quiet. The dog had stopped barking. Darius set the phone face down on the counter, with the same care he would set down a full glass of water. His expression did not change. His breathing did not change. He stood at the counter for a moment that lasted longer than it looked, and then he walked to the table, opened his laptop, and sat down. By 2 a.m., the house was completely dark, except for the blue-white glow of the screen in front of him. Adrienne had come downstairs once, around 9:30, car keys in hand. She said she wouldn't be late. He said, "Okay." She left. The door closed. He kept working. What he found was not one thing. It was a structure. The hidden account appeared first, opened 14 months ago under her maiden name at a bank across town. He found the trail through a shared family cloud account she had forgotten they both still accessed, where an automatically synced document contained partial records of transfers she believed were invisible. They were not invisible. He cross-referenced them against their joint account history, line by line, month by month, with the methodical patience of a man who had spent 15 years reading financial documents for a living. 22 months, $47,000. Moved in amounts small enough, 400 here, 900 there, sometimes just 250, to pass beneath the surface of ordinary attention. His attention was not ordinary. The emails were in a separate folder, linked through the same cloud sync, and they were 18 months of evidence that what he was looking at was not a woman who fell out of love. It was a woman who had been planning a controlled exit since before she felt anything in particular about him at all. She and Porter discussed the divorce the way people discuss a business transaction: timelines, asset targets, the expected settlement. Porter's responses were brief and practical. Adrienne's were detailed, confident, occasionally warm in the specific way of someone energized by momentum. Near the bottom of the chain, he found the line. He never had anything worth fighting for. Never did. He's just furniture I'm finally throwing out. Darius read it. He did not read it again. He closed the laptop, stood up, filled the coffee maker with water and grounds, and pressed the button and listened to it begin to work. Then he sat back down at the table with his hands folded in front of him and watched the Atlanta sky through the kitchen window. Black first, then a deep bruised gray, then the flat, pale blue of very early morning. He was not shaking. He was deciding. The parking garage on Peachtree was mostly empty at 7 in the morning. A few scattered cars on the lower level, the smell of concrete and exhaust, and something faintly metallic that big structures always carry. Darius had pulled into a spot on the 3rd floor, away from the elevator, away from the handful of early commuters who wouldn't have noticed him anyway. He sat with the engine off. He picked up his phone and called Jerome. Jerome answered on the 2nd ring, which meant he was already up, already at his desk, already 2 cups in. He always had been. Even as a kid in southwest Atlanta, Jerome had been the one with his homework done before anyone else thought to start it. "Talk to me," Jerome said. So Darius did. He spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. No emotion in it, no editorializing, just the facts in the order he had found them. The misdirected text, the shared cloud account, the hidden account in Adrienne's maiden name. The 47,000 moved in careful increments over 22 months, the 18-month email chain, the divorce discussed like a logistics project, the line about the furniture. He said the line out loud exactly once, the same way he had read it, flat, complete, without decoration. When he finished, Jerome was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness, but thought. Then he said, "Don't move a dollar. Don't change a single account. Don't confront her. Don't reference anything you found. Don't alter the financial landscape in any direction." "I know," Darius said. "I need to hear you say it." "I won't touch anything." "Good. Jerome's chair creaked. How long do I have? 3 weeks. A pause. Why 3 weeks, specifically? Darius looked out through the concrete barrier at the slice of Atlanta morning visible from the 3rd floor. Traffic was beginning to move on the street below. The city was waking up, and it didn't know anything and it didn't care either way. There's something I need to confirm, he said. Jerome waited a beat, then let it go. He knew Darius well enough to know that when the man said he needed to confirm something, the confirmation was already mostly done. I'll start pulling the framework together, Jerome said. Send me everything you pulled from the cloud account, the full chain. Already compiled. Darius had been up until 4. I'll send it when we hang up. Darius. Jerome's voice shifted, just slightly, the professional surface thinning enough to let the person underneath come through. You doing all right? A brief pause. I'm working, Darius said. Jerome accepted that. Talk soon. The confirmation came 2 days later. Darius was at his desk at the commercial property office, the legitimate one, the one that said Regional Facilities Director on the door, when his property manager, Dana, forwarded him a routine booking inquiry flagged for owner awareness. She included a single line in the body of the email. Thought you'd want to see this one directly. The attachment was a venue booking confirmation for the Meridian. The Meridian sat on top of a 12-story building in Buckhead. A rooftop event space with a full bar setup, a retractable canopy, and a clear sightline to the Atlanta skyline that photographers had described in 2 separate magazine features as the best urban view in the city. It had been a Brooks Capital Holdings property for 3 years. Darius had acquired the building when the previous owner defaulted, renovated the rooftop space with operating profits, and turned it into one of the most sought-after private event venues in the metro area. He read the booking confirmation from top to bottom. Third-party event planner. Full venue buyout. 60 guests. A Saturday evening, 3 weeks out. Client name. Adrian Brooks. Event description. Liberation celebration. He read that line twice, not because he needed to, because he wanted to be precise about what he was looking at. His wife had booked her divorce party in his building. She had no idea it was his building. That was the thing she didn't know, and had never known, because Adrian had decided who Darius was in year 2 of their marriage, and had never once revisited that decision. The Brooks Capital Holdings portfolio existed entirely outside the frame she had built around him. She had looked at a man she believed had a ceiling and stopped looking, and in the years her eyes were elsewhere, he had been buying the ceiling. He picked up his phone, called Dana. Confirm the booking, he said. Dana paused for only a second. She was a practical woman. She had worked with Darius for 6 years. Full confirmation. Deposit processed. Full confirmation. Let the planner know we're looking forward to hosting. Understood, she said, without any additional comment, which was one of the many reasons she was excellent at her job. He ended the call, opened the filing folder he had started the night of the laptop, the one that lived on an encrypted partition on his personal drive, organized by date and category. He added the booking confirmation. He labeled it clearly. Then he closed the folder, closed the drive, and went back to work. He called Beverly from his car that evening, parked outside a gas station off Memorial Drive with the engine running and the heat on low. She listened to all of it without interrupting. The text, the emails, the $47,000, Porter, and finally the venue booking. He told it the same way he told Jerome. Flat, precise, complete. When he finished, Beverly was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she laughed. It came from somewhere deep, not cruel, but full. The specific, rolling satisfaction of someone watching a story arrive at the ending it had been building toward from the very first page. It lasted about 10 seconds. Then it stopped. She booked her party in your building, Beverly said. Yes, Darius. Her voice was different now, settled and direct. "What do you need from me?" he told her. The line went quiet. Not the laughing kind of quiet. The kind that meant she was taking it seriously, turning it over, measuring it the way their mother had always measured things. Not for what they looked like, but for what they were actually made of. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've been sure," he said, "since 2 a.m. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Darius was at the front desk signing for a supply delivery when the courier walked in. The man checked his tablet, confirmed the name, and handed over the envelope with the practiced indifference of someone who had delivered bad news enough times that it had stopped registering as bad news at all. Darius signed the courier's form, took the envelope, set it on top of the supply delivery clipboard without opening it, and finished what he was doing first. Then he rode the elevator back to the 14th floor, sat down at his desk, and opened it. Adrienne's attorney was a woman named Hargrove. Darius had heard the name before. Jerome had mentioned her once in passing, the way a careful man mentions a name he wants filed away. Aggressive asset discovery. Scorched earth negotiating. The kind of attorney you hired when you wanted the other side to feel the weight of the process before a single argument was made. He read through the filing. All of it. He set it on his desk when he was done, aligned the edges with the corner of his desk pad, and sent Jerome a single text. Papers arrived. Hargrove. Jerome responded in under a minute. Expected. We're ready. Darius put his phone face down and got back to work. Pamela called 4 days later. He hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 months. She had been a colleague years ago, before the paths diverged the way paths do. Not through conflict, but through the slow drift of different priorities. She had always been decent. She had watched the marriage from the outside with the kind of clear-eyed quiet that people who aren't inside a thing sometimes have. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it before you hear it somewhere else. Go ahead." She told him about the invitations. 60 guests, their neighbors, church members, people from Adrienne's office, people who had eaten food at Darius's table, who had parked in his driveway, who had shaken his hand at summer cookouts and Christmas gatherings. "Porter's going to be there," Pamela said. Her voice was careful. "She's presenting him like a—" She paused, looking for the right word. "Like an announcement." "I understand. I'm sending you a picture of the invitation," she said. I thought you should see it." The image came through 30 seconds later. Champagne glasses, gold graphic, clean design. The kind of thing someone put real thought into. At the top, "She's finally free." He looked at it for a moment. Then he saved it to the encrypted folder, filed it under the correct date, and labeled it. "Thank you, Pamela," he said. "I mean that." "You doing okay?" she asked. "I'm working on something," he said. "I appreciate you calling." He coordinated with Dana and Jerome over the following 2 weeks in the specific way he coordinated everything, methodically, without urgency, in short, precise conversations that each covered exactly what they needed to cover and nothing more. Dana would manage the Meridian that evening as she always did, fully staffed, full service. Nothing that would signal anything unusual to the event planner or to Adrienne's guests. Jerome would be present, document case in hand, positioned and prepared. Beverly knew the full shape of what was coming and had stopped asking questions because she had already asked the only ones that mattered. Everything was in place. Everything had been in place for days. Adrienne arrived at the Meridian at 7:45 in white. It was not an accident, the white. Nothing about that evening was an accident. The dress was fitted and deliberate, and she moved through the rooftop in it with the ease of a woman who had rehearsed the occasion inside her own mind enough times that the actual evening felt like confirmation rather than event. Porter was beside her, broad-shouldered, self-satisfied, his hand at the small of her back in the practiced way of a man who understood the language of public presentation. He fit the story perfectly. That was what he was there to do. The string lights were warm. The skyline was enormous behind them, lit, and indifferent. A DJ set the temperature of the room, and 60 people in their Friday night best raised glasses and talked and laughed and offered toasts to a woman they had been told was finally, rightfully, joyfully free. Nobody mentioned Darius by name. They didn't have to. At 9:52 p.m., the music stopped. Dana stepped to the center of the rooftop with the venue's cordless microphone. She was composed, unhurried, and completely impossible to argue with before she had even said a word. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to inform you that this space has been reserved for a private engagement beginning at 10 o'clock. We'll need to begin clearing the rooftop at this time. Full refunds for this evening's booking have been authorized by the property owner. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding. The rooftop went unsteady with confusion. People turned to each other. Voices rose in overlapping questions. Adrienne moved through the crowd toward Dana, with her chin up and her voice controlled. She had a contract. She had a confirmed booking. She had 60 guests and a paid deposit, and she needed someone to explain, right now, what was happening. Dana listened to all of it with the patient, immovable courtesy of someone who had already been told exactly what to say. The property owner has made this decision directly, ma'am. The refund will be processed in full. I'm sorry for the disruption. The property owner. Before anyone could locate the meaning inside those words, the sound arrived. It came from below the skyline first, a low, rhythmic percussion, felt in the chest before it was understood by the mind. Then the downdraft hit. The string lights bent in long, sweeping arcs. Cocktail napkins lifted off tables and spiraled sideways. The hem of Adrienne's white dress pressed flat against her legs. A helicopter descended toward the landing pad adjacent to the building. The pad that had always been there. The pad Adrienne had walked past 2 hours ago without registering it as anything other than architecture. On the side panel of the aircraft, visible as it settled, a logo. Clean sans serif lettering, small and unflashy. Brooks Capital Holdings. The door opened. Darius stepped out. He was wearing a charcoal suit, perfectly fitted, no tie, top button open. He moved across the landing pad without breaking stride and without looking at anyone in particular, with the unhurried ease of a man conducting a routine visit to a property he owned. Because he was. Jerome followed 2 steps behind, carrying a leather document case, his expression pleasant and entirely unreadable. Darius moved through the rooftop. Brief handshake with Dana. A slow, proprietary survey of the space, the bar setup, the canopy, the sight lines, the specific, casual inventory of someone who had approved the renovation budget for all of it. He did not go to Adrienne. He did not acknowledge Porter. Then he looked at her. Once, across the full width of the rooftop. It was not a performance. There was no triumph in it. No wounded drama. It was the look of a man in full possession of the complete picture, who no longer needed a single thing from the person standing across from him. Every email, every increment of stolen money. Every morning she walked past him without speaking. Every decision he made in the silence her contempt created. All of it, held in a single sustained look that said none of it out loud. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. He took out his phone, dialed, did not step aside. He stood where he was and spoke at a volume the immediate circle could hear clearly. His eyes found Deborah, Adrienne's mother, standing 6 feet away with a champagne flute she had entirely forgotten she was holding. The property your daughter filed a claim on is a separate LLC asset, he said, calm and unhurried, established before any marital funds were involved. Her attorney will have the full documentation by 8 tomorrow morning. A pause. She planned her liberation celebration in my building. I thought you should know that before you left. He ended the call, pocketed the phone. He looked at Porter once, not with anger, Not with contempt, with the specific, complete absence of expression that communicates something far worse than either total irrelevance. Porter had taken one careful step backward. His hand was no longer at the small of Adrienne's back. Darius nodded to Dana. Then he turned and walked back across the rooftop. The same pace, the same quiet authority, and boarded the helicopter. The door closed. The rotors accelerated. It lifted into the Atlanta night, banked south, the logo catching the city light for one long, visible moment. Then the dark swallowed it whole. On the rooftop, nobody spoke. The string lights were still moving in the fading downdraft. The DJ's equipment sat untouched. 60 people stood inside a building they now understood belonged to the man they had spent the evening toasting the absence of. Porter looked at his phone, found something on the screen that required his immediate attention somewhere that was not here. Adrienne did not move. The champagne in her glass had gone flat. The Atlanta skyline glittered behind her, vast and indifferent. Somewhere to the south, a helicopter was already gone. She stood at the center of everything she had arranged, and for the first time since she had decided Darius Brooks had a ceiling, she was not sure of anything at all. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. Hargrove was already at her desk when her phone rang. She was always at her desk, which was part of what Adrienne was paying for. She listened to the summary without interrupting. The helicopter, the logo, the property manager, the announcement about a separate LLC, Deborah standing there with a champagne glass she couldn't put down. When Adrienne finished, Hargrove said, "Send me everything you have on the Meridian venue and any LLC filings you're aware of under his name." Adrienne said she didn't have any LLC filings. She didn't know about any LLC. There was a pause on Hargrove's end that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "I'll call his attorney," Hargrove said. "Don't talk to anyone today." Jerome answered on the second ring. He listened to Hargrove's opening with the pleasant, unhurried attention of a man who had been expecting this call for 3 weeks and had already decided how it would go. Hargrove was professional and precise. She laid out the position cleanly, identified Brooks Capital Holdings as a potential marital asset on the basis of its formation during the marriage, and requested a full disclosure of the LLC's founding documentation, capitalization records, and operational financials. Jerome said he would be happy to provide full documentation at the appropriate stage of proceedings. Hargrove asked if he could tell her anything preliminary about the company's founding capital, specifically whether any marital funds had been used in the LLC's formation. Jerome said he could tell her the documentation would speak for itself. Hargrove tried 2 more angles. Jerome was cordial for both of them. When she pushed on the timeline of the LLC's formation, he said, "We'll see you at the deposition, counselor. I think you'll find the record very thorough." He wished her a good morning and ended the call. The record was more than thorough. It was 8 years deep and clean at every layer. The origin of Brooks Capital Holdings was not complicated. It was simply not visible, because Darius had understood, early and without bitterness, that anything he named out loud inside his marriage would be assessed, found insufficient, and filed away as evidence of his limitations. He had stopped naming things out loud in year 2, when he brought Adrienne a business concept he had spent 4 months developing, and she listened with the polite, pained patience of a woman waiting for her turn to explain why the timing wasn't right, why the numbers were soft, why they should focus on stability before anything else. He had nodded. He had folded the pages. He had not brought it up again. He had simply started building. The seed capital came from Beverly. 3 years before the marriage, Beverly had received a legal settlement, a premises liability case that took 4 years to resolve, and paid out in a single lump sum that she held in her own account and thought about carefully for 6 months before she called her brother. The gift was documented in writing. It named the amount, the source, the recipient, and the intent. It was signed, notarized, and filed with Jerome at the time of transfer. The money moved into a dedicated account under Darius's name, separate from anything he and Adrienne would later share, and it sat there untouched for 11 months while he identified the right property. He found it in southwest Atlanta, a distressed two-tenant commercial strip that the market had passed over because the neighborhood looked to most buyers like a long-term problem. Darius looked at it differently. He saw the transit corridor 3 blocks east. He saw the rezoning proposals moving through city council. He saw a price that reflected the fear of other people rather than the actual value of the land. He bought it, managed it himself, and reinvested every dollar it produced. He did not tell Adrienne. He did not hide it from her in the dramatic sense. He simply never offered it, the way a man stops offering things to someone who has already decided what his offerings are worth. Over 8 years, 1 property became 4, 4 became 9, 9 became 12, spread across Georgia and Tennessee, managed through a clean LLC structure, funded entirely from the compounding returns of that first careful purchase. No marital account had ever touched it. No joint dollar had passed through it. Every transaction was documented, dated, and organized in the specific way of a man who had always understood that what he built alone needed to be unambiguously, irrefutably, completely his. Brooks Capital Holdings. Net asset value, $4.2 million. The marital assets Adrienne had built her entire strategy around, the house, the joint savings account, totaled $441,000. She had spent 2 years engineering a financial extraction from the wrong number. Jerome set the completed binder on the desk between them. It was thick. 8 years of quarterly financials, founding documentation, property transaction records, Beverly's gift letter on top. Everything in sequence, everything clean. Her attorney is going to argue commingling, Jerome said. She'll say the LLC appreciated during the marriage, and that creates an equitable claim. Darius looked at the binder. He picked it up, felt the weight of it, set it back down. "Let her," he said. He closed the folder. He was ready. Jerome introduced Webb on a Tuesday morning, in a corner office that smelled like coffee and old paper. Webb was a compact man, mid-50s, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, not unfriendly, just economical. He wore a plain gray suit and carried a battered leather satchel that looked older than the building they were sitting in. He shook Darius's hand once, briefly, and sat down without being asked. Jerome said, "Webb handles our forensic financial work. He's thorough." Webb didn't react to the compliment. He just opened the satchel, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and clicked his pen. He looked at Darius. "Tell me what you know about Porter Langston." Darius told him. All of it. The email chain, the redirected funds, the condo, the way Porter had inserted himself into Adrienne's narrative as proof of something better waiting on the other side. He spoke without emotion, the way he always spoke about things that mattered. Carefully, completely, without leaving gaps. Webb wrote 4 lines of notes. That was all. He clicked his pen closed and said, "Give me 10 days." He was back in 8. The report arrived as a sealed envelope handed directly to Jerome, who called Darius that afternoon and told him to come by the office. He didn't say anything else on the phone. He didn't need to. Darius sat across from Jerome's desk and read the report himself, from the first page to the last, while Jerome waited in silence with his hands folded on the desk. Porter Langston was not a real estate developer. He presented as one. The presentation was convincing enough to survive the kind of casual background check that a woman in love, or a woman in a hurry, might actually run. Langston Group LLC had a clean website, a respectable address in Midtown Atlanta, and a LinkedIn profile that listed a decade of development experience across the Southeast. It had 2 employees. One of them was Porter. The other was a woman named Cynthia, who answered the phone, managed appointments, and had worked there for less than a year. The Midtown office was a rented suite, the kind that came furnished, with a shared receptionist and a month-to-month lease, the kind that could be vacated in 72 hours without leaving a mark. The condo, the one Porter had shown Adrienne as proof of his success, the one he told her was hers to think of as home, carried a mortgage at 96% of its appraised value. Porter had put down almost nothing. The property generated no equity and existed primarily as a stage set, something solid and addressable that he could point to when a woman needed to see evidence that he was who he said he was. The renovation was the part that sat heaviest. Webb had reconstructed the money trail with the quiet precision of a man who had done this kind of work for 2 decades and knew exactly where people believed their transactions were invisible. The renovation of the condo, the new kitchen, the bathroom retile, the hardwood floors Adrienne had described in one of her emails to a friend as, finally, something real, had been funded almost entirely from the $47,000 she redirected from her own marital household account. Her money, moved in small amounts over 22 months, deposited into the account in her maiden name, withdrawn in tranches that aligned, almost dollar for dollar, with the contractor invoices Webb had located through public permit filings. Porter hadn't given her anything. He had accepted her stolen money, handed it back to her in the form of a renovated kitchen, and allowed her to experience it as his generosity. He had taken her contempt for her husband, her need to believe she was ascending, and her willingness to move fast, and he had monetized all 3 with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it before. Because he had. The last section of Webb's report was on a woman named Denise, a paralegal, Charlotte, North Carolina. 3 years prior, Denise had filed a civil case against Porter Langston for fraudulent misrepresentation and financial predation. The original complaint was included in the file, 12 pages, methodical and precise, the kind of document that a person writes after months of collecting themselves and deciding they are not going to be quiet about what happened to them. She withdrew the case 14 months later. The report noted simply, plaintiff cited financial strain and process fatigue as reasons for withdrawal. The legal system had not failed Denise dramatically. It had simply outlasted her. That was its own kind of failure, quiet and total. Webb's analysis linked the 2 situations, Denise and Adrienne, through a documented financial pattern that was identical in its sequence: the approach, the credibility construction, the gift that was not a gift, the exit, clean and early, before legal exposure could develop. Darius closed the report. He sat in his car outside Jerome's office building, the engine off, the folder closed on the passenger seat beside him. The afternoon sun was pressing hard through the windshield. Atlanta moved around him. Traffic, voices, the distant percussion of a city that did not pause for anything. He was not satisfied. That was the unexpected part. He had expected something that felt like victory, and what he felt instead was the full, strange weight of understanding, the kind that doesn't make you feel better, just more complete. Adrienne had spent a decade being certain about what he was. She had been so certain that she stopped looking at anything else. And in the gap that certainty created, a man like Porter had simply walked in and helped himself. He picked up his phone, called Beverly. She answered on the second ring. "How bad?" "Bad," he said. The renovation she believed was his gift to her. It was her own money, the $47,000. He handed it back to her and let her think it came from him. Beverly was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "She doesn't know yet, does she?" "No," Darius said. "When does she find out?" He looked out through the windshield at the street ahead of him. After the deposition, the conference room was on the 11th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. Neutral, deliberately so. The kind of room designed to belong to no one, with gray carpet, recessed lighting, and a long rectangular table that could have been in any office building in any city in America. A water pitcher sat in the center, 4 glasses, a box of tissues that nobody would touch. Hargrove and Adrian were already seated when Darius and Jerome walked in. Adrian looked up when the door opened. Something moved across her face. Quick, almost invisible, the kind of micro-expression a person produces when reality arrives slightly ahead of their preparation for it. She had known he would be here. She had prepared for it. But knowing and seeing are 2 different things, and Darius could tell from the half-second pause in her composure that the helicopter had changed something in the geometry of how she looked at him. He had not been the man she expected him to be that night. He was not being that man now either. She recovered, smoothed the front of her blazer, looked down at the legal pad in front of her. Darius set his phone face down on the table and sat across from her without a word. Jerome placed his document case beside his chair, greeted Hargrove with the pleasant nod of a man who has nothing against her personally, and poured himself a glass of water. Hargrove opened the proceedings with the focused energy of someone who had spent the previous 2 weeks constructing an argument and was confident in its foundation. She was direct. She was thorough. She had done her homework. Her position was straightforward. Brooks Capital Holdings was formed during the marriage. Under Georgia law, assets acquired during a marriage are presumed marital property, subject to equitable division. The LLC had grown substantially in value during the years Adrian and Darius shared a household, shared expenses, and functioned as a legal and financial unit. Whatever its origins, its appreciation occurred within the marriage. Adrian was entitled to an equitable share. She delivered all of it cleanly. No theater, no excess. Just the argument, laid out in sequence. Jerome listened with his hands folded on the table. When Hargrove finished, he said, "Thank you," with the genuine courtesy of someone who appreciated a well-organized presentation. Then he opened his document case. He did not rush. The first document he placed on the table was a single letter, 2 pages, dated 9 years ago, notarized and co-signed by an Atlanta attorney who had since retired, but whose signature was entirely verifiable. It was a gift letter. Beverly's name was at the top. The letter documented the transfer of funds from Beverly's legal settlement to a separate account held solely in Darius's name, predating the marriage by 14 months. The letter specified that the transfer was a gift, not a loan, with no expectation of repayment and no claim against future assets. Below the gift letter was the bank record showing the account's opening date, its balance, and the date of Beverly's deposit. Jerome set the LLC formation documents beside it. The founding date, the capital contribution, the source account, matching the pre-marital gift account, dollar for dollar. Then came the financials, 8 years of them, annual statements, quarterly breakdowns, acquisition records, operating accounts. Jerome arranged them in chronological order, with the unhurried precision of a man who had organized them 100 times in preparation and could have done it in his sleep. Every property acquisition, every dollar reinvested, every account that had ever touched Brooks Capital Holdings money. Not one of them connected to the joint marital account. Not one of them showed a transfer from any fund Adrienne had ever contributed to or had access to. The LLC had been built inside a financial architecture that was entirely separate from their marriage, not by accident and not by deception, but by discipline. The paper trail didn't just support Darius's position. It closed every door Hargrove had been planning to walk through. Jerome folded his hands again and said nothing. He let the documents sit. Hargrove studied the records for several minutes. The room was very quiet. Then Jerome reached into the document case a second time and placed another folder on the table. No one had asked for it. He set it down with the same calm deliberateness as everything else. Just another document. Just another fact requiring acknowledgement. "This is separate," he said pleasantly. It pertains to a counterclaim. He opened the folder himself and turned it so Hargrove could read the top page. 22 months of transfers from the joint marital account into an account held in Ms. Brooks's maiden name. The total is $47,230. We've traced the withdrawals through Webb Financial Forensics. He tapped the second page. Webb's reconstruction, laid out in columns so clean they were almost elegant. Under Georgia law, the deliberate redirection of marital funds for a non-marital purpose constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We'll be entering this into the record. Hargrove looked at the folder. She looked at Jerome. She asked for a recess. Jerome refilled his water glass. He sat back in his chair and looked at nothing in particular, patient as furniture. Darius looked at Adrienne. She was still seated. She had not followed Hargrove out of the room. She sat at the far end of the table with her hands flat on its surface, and she was looking at him. Really looking, the way she hadn't in years, not with contempt. Not with the performed composure she had worn into the room like a second blazer. With something unresolved and searching, the expression of a woman moving backward through a timeline, trying to locate the exact moment when the story she had been telling herself had separated from the story that was actually true. Darius looked back at her. His face was still, not hard, still. No anger in it, no satisfaction either. Just the patient, complete attention of a man who had nothing left to perform and nothing left to prove. He did not look away. She was the first to drop her eyes. The door opened. Hargrove stepped back in. She did not sit down immediately. She stood at the head of the table, straightened the folder in front of her, and looked at Jerome. "My client," she said carefully, "would like to discuss settlement terms." Darius called Deborah from his car. He did not rehearse what he was going to say. He did not need to. He had been thinking about this call for 3 weeks. Not the words exactly, but the shape of it, the purpose. He knew what it needed to be, and what it needed not to be. And the line between those two things was something he intended to hold without difficulty. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was warm in the careful way of someone who had been expecting to hear from him eventually, and had not yet decided how to feel about it. He asked if she would meet him for coffee. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said yes. The coffee shop was in Decatur. Quiet on a weekday afternoon. Exposed brick walls and wooden tables, and the low sound of something instrumental coming from a speaker somewhere near the back. Darius arrived first and chose a corner table, away from the windows, away from the foot traffic near the door. He ordered 2 cups before she arrived. Deborah walked in wearing a gray cardigan and the specific expression of a woman who has rehearsed being calm. She was 61 years old and carried herself the way women do when they have spent decades being the steady one in rooms full of people who needed steadiness from them. She was good at it. Darius had always respected that about her. She sat down. She looked at him across the table. She accepted the coffee. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Darius reached into the document case he had set beside his chair and placed a folder on the table between them. He did not open it. He did not explain it. He pushed it gently to her side of the table and set his hands around his coffee cup and waited. Deborah looked at the folder. Then she looked at him. He said, "Take your time." She opened it. She read in complete silence. Darius watched her hands, the way they turned each page carefully, the way they stilled completely when she reached Webb's financial reconstruction. She did not rush. She did not skim. She moved through every page the way a precise woman moves through something she wants to understand fully before she responds to it. The affair timeline, the 22 months of transfers, the condo and the deed, Porter's financials, the hollow shell of Langston Group LLC, the 96% mortgage, the renovation funded by the money Adrienne had taken from her own marriage and handed to a man who packaged it back to her as love. Denise's original complaint from Charlotte. The pattern Webb had laid out in 2 columns that made Porter's methodology look exactly like what it was: a system, practiced and refined. And then the last page, the email. Darius watched Deborah read it. He watched her stop reading. He watched her read it again. She closed the folder. She set it on the table with both hands and looked out the window at the parking lot and the gray afternoon beyond it. A long moment passed. When she looked back at him, something in her face had shifted. Not broken, not theatrical, shifted. The way a foundation shifts when the weight above it has changed. She said, "I told people you were difficult." Her voice was even. She had decided to say it plainly, and she did. "I told the women at church that you had held her back, that she had been patient with a man who didn't appreciate what he had." She stopped. "I believed her," Darius said. "I know." She looked at him carefully. "You knew I was saying those things?" "I knew the version of the story she was telling. I knew you'd heard it." Deborah nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked down at it. "I defended her. To people who respected me." She said it the way a person says something out loud that they have already understood privately, not for his benefit, but because saying it was part of accepting it. "Yes," Darius said. She looked up. "So why are you sitting here showing me this? What do you want from me?" Darius was quiet for a moment. He looked at the folder between them on the table and then back at her. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not showing you this to change what you think of me. I don't need that." He paused. "I'm showing you because you went to those women with your name behind what she told you. You have credibility in that community. You used it for her because she asked you to, and you didn't have the full picture." He picked up his coffee. "You deserved the truth before she needed something else from you." Deborah looked at him for a long time. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She was not that kind of woman, and he had not come here for that. She said, "She's my daughter." "I know that," he said. "I will always love my daughter. I'm not asking you not to." She nodded once. She looked down at the folder. Darius paid for the coffee. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at her one last time. "You can keep that," he said. Then he walked out. The condo listing went live on a Thursday. Adrienne found it through an automated real estate alert she had set up on properties matching the address, a habit from the early months when Porter would send her listings and she would track neighborhoods, imagining a future that had the clean lines of a decision made correctly. The listing showed the unit at full market value, updated photos, available immediately. Porter's name was nowhere on the posting. A third-party broker had been assigned. Adrienne called Porter. He didn't answer. She called again. He didn't answer. She called 15 more times across the next 4 hours. He answered on the 17th call with the measured calm of a man who had already decided what he was going to say, and was mostly annoyed that he'd had to wait this long to say it. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. She did not tell Beverly the specifics of what he said, but Beverly didn't need them. Adrienne called Beverly at 8:47 that evening. Beverly was in her kitchen when the call came in. She looked at the name on the screen for one moment, then answered with the warm, unhurried voice of a woman who had all the time in the world. Adrienne talked. Beverly listened. She asked the right questions in the right places, not to extract, but to open doors that Adrienne was already walking through on her own. She offered nothing of substance. She gave no opinions, no information, no indication of what she knew or didn't know. She was simply warm enough, steady enough, present enough to keep the conversation moving until Adrienne had said everything she came to say. When the call ended, Beverly set her phone on the counter. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she called her brother. Darius answered on the second ring. Beverly told him everything. What Adrienne had said, what she hadn't said, and what the space between those two things clearly meant. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet. "Is she scared?" he asked. Beverly said, "She's starting to be." He said, "Good. Then she'll show up." Beverly set her elbows on the counter and looked out the kitchen window at the dark backyard. "So, I'm planning a dinner." Beverly's house smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked and warm. The kind of smell that lived in a house, not just a kitchen. String lights were strung along the back porch, and their glow came through the sliding glass door and fell soft across the dining room table. 8 chairs, 8 settings. Darius was already seated when the doorbell rang. He was at the far end of the table talking quietly with Marcus, who had driven up from Macon that afternoon and had the easy, settled energy of a man who understood exactly why he had been asked to be there. Trey sat across from Marcus, turning a glass of sweet tea slowly in his hands. Beverly moved between the kitchen and the table with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who had already done everything that needed doing and was now simply waiting. Deborah had arrived 20 minutes early. She sat to Beverly's left, with her hands folded in her lap, and said very little. The doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. Beverly opened the door. Adrienne was in a burgundy blazer and dark slacks, hair pinned back, the specific put-together of a woman who had decided in the car that she was going to be fine. She smiled when she saw Beverly. Warm, practiced, the kind of smile that had always opened doors for her. She stepped inside. She saw Darius. It lasted less than 2 seconds. The thing that moved across her face. A small, rapid rearrangement. Not fear, not guilt. Something more like calculation. The private internal machinery of a woman who has just realized the room is configured differently than she expected and is already building a response. She found the smile again quickly. She touched Beverly's arm and said the house smelled amazing. Beverly said thank you and led her to her seat. Adrienne sat. She accepted wine. She spoke to Marcus and Trey with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent years at family tables and knew how to work one. She did not address Darius directly. She did not ignore him in a way that was obvious. She was careful, and she was skilled. And for the first 40 minutes, she managed the room almost exactly the way she had always managed rooms. The food was good. The conversation stayed light. Marcus told a story about his youngest son. Trey laughed at something Adrienne said about city parking. Beverly kept the plates full and the wine poured. Darius ate and said very little and watched everything. At the 43-minute mark, Deborah set her fork down. The sound of it, the small, deliberate sound of silver against ceramic, moved through the room and settled. Beverly heard it and stopped reaching for the breadbasket. Marcus looked up. Trey went still. Deborah looked at her daughter. She did not raise her voice. She had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She spoke in the same even tone she used in every serious conversation she had ever had. The tone of a woman who had already decided what needed to be said and had made peace with the cost of saying it. She recited what she had learned, not dramatically, not with accusation building toward a crescendo. She said it the way a woman reads a record she has memorized, plainly, completely, in sequence. The timeline, the transfers, 22 months, $47,000, the condo and whose name was on it, Porter's company, and what it actually was, the woman in Charlotte, the renovation paid for with Adrienne's own stolen money, returned to her as a gift by the man who took it, and then the email. She quoted it from memory, word for word, without looking away. Adrienne set her wine glass down. She said the folder was one-sided. She said context mattered. She looked to Marcus and said Darius had always kept her at a distance, that the marriage had problems she didn't cause alone. Marcus looked at his plate. She looked to Trey. Trey turned his glass slowly and said nothing. She looked at Beverly. Beverly looked back at her and did not look away. The table had withdrawn, not cruelly, not with ceremony. It had simply stopped offering her the foothold she was reaching for, one by one, until she was standing in the center of a room that was no longer arranged around her version of events. Deborah picked up her fork and resumed eating. Then Darius set down his own fork. Quiet. Deliberate. He looked at Adrian. He said, "You decided I had a ceiling early, before you had any real reason to, and once you decided, you never went back to check if you were right. Even when the evidence was telling you something different. You'd already written the story. I was the limitation in it." He paused. "So I stopped trying to show you anything. I built what I built without asking for your belief, because your belief stopped being something I needed." The room was completely still. "You can have the house," he said. "Keep everything you fought for. All of it." He picked up his napkin, folded it, and set it beside his plate. "I'm done with everything that was small." He stood. He looked at Beverly and said dinner was excellent. He shook Marcus's hand across the table, then Trey's. He looked at Deborah, and his voice dropped to something quiet and direct. "Thank you," he said. He did not look at Adrian again. He walked out of his sister's house, and the front door closed behind him, and the night outside was wide and dark, and his. At the table, no one spoke. Adrienne sat in the center of the room, the blazer still neat, the wine still in her glass. Every surface of the space she had believed she could manage now completely and irrevocably still. Jerome's phone rang at 8:04 a.m. He was already at his desk. He had been at his desk since 7, which was habit, which was how he had always operated. He let it ring twice, then answered. Hargrove's voice was measured, professional. She had the particular flatness of a woman who had walked into a room expecting leverage and left with none, and had spent the night deciding how to position what came next. She said her client was prepared to accept a settlement, the shared home, the outstanding mortgage assumed in full, a cash disbursement of $18,000 from the joint savings account. Jerome listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "We'll need that in writing by end of day." Hargrove said she understood. Jerome said, "The LLC is not part of this conversation. It was never part of this conversation." A pause. Then, "Understood." He ended the call. He set his phone on the desk and sat for a moment with his hands folded, looking at the window. Then he opened his files and got back to work. The condo listing went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it had passed through the same channels that the Liberation Celebration invitations had traveled 6 weeks earlier. The same group texts, the same neighborhood networks, the same professional contacts who had lifted their glasses and toasted Adrian's freedom. The property was listed under Porter's name alone. Adrian's contribution to the renovation was not mentioned. It never would be. People noticed the discrepancy without being told to notice it. That was how these things worked. The listing circulated. Questions followed. The questions found answers in conversations that Deborah was already having. She did not post anything. She did not broadcast. She sat across from women she had known for 20 years in the same church fellowship hall where she had defended her daughter's version of the story, and she corrected the record the same way she had damaged it, directly, quietly, with the full weight of her credibility behind every word. She told them what she had seen. She told them what the documents said. She told them she had been wrong about Darius Brooks, and she said it without qualification, because Deborah was not a woman who issued half apologies. Beverly worked differently. She made calls to people who had respected Darius for years and watched him get replaced in the social narrative with a version of himself that bore no resemblance to the man they knew. She didn't dramatize, she just told them what happened. She told them about the building. She told them about the company. She told them what Porter actually was. Marcus and Trey handled the men, in the direct, economical way that men in their circle communicated, over phone calls, over lunch, in 2 sentences when 2 sentences were enough. You know what Darius built? You know what she did with the money? You know what that man Porter actually is? The answers moved through the network and settled. No posts, no public confrontations, no screenshots shared to 100 strangers. Just the truth, moving person by person, the way the lie had moved, and sticking. The way truth sticks when the people carrying it have nothing to gain from it except their own integrity. Jerome's letter to the managing director of Adrienne's marketing firm was 3 paragraphs long. It introduced Brooks Capital Holdings. It expressed interest in building partnership relationships with firms serving the company's growing tenant base. It was cordial and completely professional and contained no mention of Adrienne Brooks by name. The managing director received it on a Wednesday morning. She read it once. She pulled up the Brooks Capital tenant list, which was publicly available through commercial real estate filings. Then she pulled Adrienne's client roster. The overlap was immediate. She did not fire Adrienne. She was not that kind of manager, and the firm was not that kind of firm. But by the following Monday, 3 of Adrienne's 4 largest accounts had been quietly reassigned to a senior colleague. Adrienne was informed that the realignment reflected a restructuring of the client services division. No one raised their voice. No one said Darius's name. The accounts were simply gone. The package to Charlotte went out on a Friday through Jerome's courier service, addressed to Denise, marked personal and confidential. Inside, Webb's complete investigative report on Porter Langston, the financial pattern across both situations, documented in sequence, the condo records, the Langston Group LLC filings, and Denise's own original complaint, the one she had filed and withdrawn 3 years ago, returned to her now with everything she hadn't been able to access the first time, everything that would have made withdrawal unnecessary. Jerome's cover letter was 4 sentences. It identified the sender as legal counsel in a separate matter involving Porter Langston. It stated that the enclosed documentation had been compiled in connection with that matter and was being shared because the recipient was owed information that had not been available to her when she needed it. It included no instructions. It made no requests. It ended, "We wish you well." Denise received the package on her lunch break. She was a paralegal. She had worked for a litigation firm for 9 years. She opened the envelope at her desk, cleared a space, and read through every page with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who had been waiting a long time to see exactly this kind of documentation. When she reached the last page, she set it down. She sat for a moment. Then she reached for her phone and called her attorney. In Houston, Porter's phone buzzed on the nightstand with a notification he did not yet understand. The machinery was in motion. The conference room on the 14th floor had glass on 3 sides. Below it, the Cumberland River moved through the city in wide, slow curves, gray-green in the afternoon light, unhurried, the kind of water that had been going where it was going for a long time and had no need to announce it. Nashville spread out in every direction beyond the glass, building cranes, new construction, the particular skyline of a city in the middle of becoming something larger than it used to be. Darius recognized that energy. He had built inside it his entire adult life. He was in a meeting. 4 people across the table, a commercial broker, a civil engineer, and 2 members of his acquisitions team who had relocated from Atlanta 6 months ago when the satellite office opened. The conversation was about a 14th property, a mixed-use building in Germantown, 2 blocks off the main corridor, undervalued by a market that hadn't caught up to the neighborhood yet. The kind of asset Darius could read in 10 minutes and had been reading correctly for 8 years. He listened more than he spoke. That had always been his way. When he did speak, the room adjusted. Not because he raised his voice, he didn't, but because the people in that room had sought him out, had read his track record, and made their own decisions about what his words were worth. And so when he offered an opinion, it landed with the full weight of everything he had demonstrated before he said it. This was what he had built. Not just the properties, not just the portfolio. This, the room, the posture, the complete absence of any need to prove himself to anyone sitting in it. The meeting ended at 3:15. The broker shook his hand and used the word visionary. Darius thanked him without agreeing or disagreeing and walked him to the elevator. The office was quiet after they left. He stood at the glass for a moment, looking at the river. Jerome appeared in the doorway behind him, no longer just his attorney, but his named operational partner, a title that had been accurate for years before it was ever official. Jerome set a folder on the conference table. Acquisition 13's closing documents, fully executed. 13, Jerome said. Darius looked at the folder. 14's better. Jerome smiled. He picked up his jacket from the chair. Flight's at 6. I know. Jerome left. Darius stood at the window a moment longer. Then he picked up his phone and checked his messages. There was a voicemail from Deborah. She left them every week or two. Never long, never heavy. This one was about her garden. The tomatoes were coming in late this year, she said. She wasn't sure why. She thought maybe she'd planted them too close together. She said she hoped his week was going well. She said goodbye the way she always did, warmly, without expectation. He listened to the whole thing. He would call her back from the airport. Some things he knew the way you know things you have stopped needing to think about. He knew that Adrian was in the house she'd fought for, managing a mortgage that ran heavier than she'd anticipated. He knew her client roster had been narrowed in a way that was quiet and durable and showed no signs of reversing. He knew she was telling people the divorce had been mutual. He knew that some people believed her, and that most of the people who mattered had enough of the real story to understand what mutual actually meant in this context. He did not spend time on it. He knew that Porter was the subject of a civil suit filed in Mecklenburg County. Denise's case. Her documentation was thorough. Webb's reports, Porter's full financial history, the pattern that linked Charlotte to Atlanta with the systematic clarity of a man who had done this enough times to get careless. Her attorney was patient. The case had the steady, grinding momentum of someone who had waited years to be ready and was no longer willing to be rushed or exhausted into stopping. Porter had recently retained his third lawyer in 6 months. Darius had not spoken to anyone involved in the case, had not been asked to, and would not be needed. He knew that Beverly's kitchen had been finished for 3 weeks. He had arranged the renovation while she was in Savannah visiting their mother. New appliances, new countertops, the farmhouse sink she had mentioned once in passing 3 years ago, in a way that made clear she had already decided it was something she would never have. She had called him from the driveway when she got home. She was crying before she finished the first sentence. He had told her it was long overdue. She had told him he was impossible. They had talked for an hour. The flight to Atlanta boarded at 6 and lifted just past 6:30. Darius had the window seat. He always took the window seat. He settled in, declined the earbuds, and watched Nashville shrink below him, the river catching the last of the evening light. The cranes, the Germantown corridor 2 blocks off the main stretch, where a building was waiting for someone with patience and a very long horizon. The plane leveled, then began its southward arc. He looked out the window at the dark below, the highway grids and the scattered lit squares of neighborhoods, and the long stretches of nothing between one city and the next. And he thought about a kitchen in Atlanta at 2 in the morning, an open laptop, a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, while outside the window the sky moved from black to gray to the flat, pale blue of a morning he had spent making a decision. He thought about what that night had cost him, the years before it that had cost him more, the particular weight of loving someone who had already decided what you were worth before you had the chance to show them. He thought about what all of it had built in him, the discipline that had always been there, sharpened now into something finer, the stillness that was never weakness, the understanding, hard-won and permanent, that the most dangerous thing you could do to a man like him was to look past him and leave him room to work. He would not change a single thing. He closed his eyes. The plane descended. Below him, Atlanta spread toward the horizon, enormous, indifferent, glittering, the same city it had always been, full of people building things in the dark that the people around them could not yet see. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.